안녕하세요. Good afternoon to everyone, and good morning, evening, wherever you may be as you meet in this virtual space. Welcome to the 4th UNESCO-UNITWIN Symposium, Arts Education in and Through a Time of Crisis. A big thank you to Professor Park and the CASES team for organizing this year's symposium. I'm Chiho, the moderator for this session, and I'm currently Associate Professor of Music Education at the Visual and Performing Arts Academic Group at the National Institute of Education in Singapore. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce to you the presenters for this Diversity and Cultural Representation session today. Each presenter or group of presenters will be given 15 minutes for their presentation, and at the end of all the 4 presentations, we will have a 20-minute discussion. Viewers may type in any questions that they may have in the live chat platform, and I will try to get to them during the discussion. So the first presenter for today will be Ruth Rentschler. Professor Rentschler is located at the Business Department of the University of South Australia. She is a management scholar in the context of arts and culture. She is also the Deputy Chair of the Board of Australian Dance Theatre and Chair of the Board of No Strings Attached Theatre of Disability. Her presentation title today will be Arts in Time of Crisis, the Case of Inequality. Over to you, Ruth. Ruth, you might want to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Can you see my slides? Yes. We're talking today about the role of arts education in times of crisis in giving voice to marginalised groups. The global health pandemic has created that crisis, not only as a health crisis, but a crisis that's affected jobs and people's well-being. So we'll look at a brief case study of an artist with disability who's independent and employed in various art companies doing different types of artistic work. So what are people saying about COVID-19? Some of the people I've interviewed have said, I'm at high risk, both of getting the virus and of having a bad experience if I do. So I've been in isolation for a while now. So what is the role of arts education in times of crisis in giving voice to marginalised individuals and groups? Some of the government reports on the issue of disability in the arts talk about building programs with a key priority for artists with disability through peak bodies such as the Australia Council for the Arts, the federal government's arts funding and advisory body, and the Cultural Ministers Council, that is the arts ministers from each state of Australia who provide advice on what to do in the arts. Artists with disability through these functionary bodies are profiled as vital contributors to Australia's arts and culture due to their unique perspectives and lived experience, contributing to layers of powerful expression, creativity, and storytelling. Less than 1% of Australia Council for the Arts funding, however, is allocated to artists with a disability or the companies that support artists with a disability, illustrating the need for action through education. This project examines arts education programs tailored to individual ability to enable people in the arts with disability to be job ready. The project jointly develops artist programs for career paths in a time of crisis. The persistent underrepresentation of marginalised groups in the arts Their precarious employment in project-based and contract jobs or being employed independently was made worse by COVID-19, so that we see an urgent and important need to build career paths in a radically changing world through tailored education programs. The sorts of issues that artists with a disability face during the pandemic are isolation, Zoom fatigue. Zoom is wonderful, but it makes you very tired because you're asked to do many things at once, and quite often we're not familiar with all those things. They feel like the artists with a disability, the forgotten people. In Australia, we had the government recognise the needs of Aboriginal people in the pandemic, the needs of senior Australians in the pandemic. But people with a disability, including artists with a disability, felt they were forgotten, and they had to advocate and lobby to have their voice heard during the pandemic. Because they're susceptible to contracting COVID-19 due to their compromised immune systems, making it much more urgent that something's done for them. Furthermore, they need support workers quite often for a range of things that they need to do, and they need social supports to help them get out and about and go about their daily activities. At the wider level, the creative industry issues are things like disrupted work, where those who used to go to work every day are now working from home or don't have any work, or maybe are underemployed. The precarious employment, as I mentioned before, where you're employed on a short-term contract or casually, and the work's dried up because theatres have been closed, art galleries have been closed, and no creative work is taking place. The casualised jobs mentioned before and the underemployment as well. All this is in a landscape of downscaled, postponed or cancelled events, reducing people's income sometimes to zero and therefore affecting their livelihood as well as their well-being. In the arts, 70% of businesses in Australia, creative businesses, were impacted by COVID-19, the worst hit, along with tourism and hospitality. So the arts was one of the worst. 53% of businesses in the creative sector in Australia have not been trading. And there's a 20% decrease in payroll jobs, which illustrates the extent of the crisis in this industry. So if we look at the industry more broadly, the creative industries have been bringing in, before COVID, nearly 112 billion Australian dollars to gross domestic product. They employ 600,000 people, which includes 50,000 professional artists. Because of the advocacy that the arts made with one voice to government, joining the non-profit arts with the commercial sector, the government made a response and offered a significant amount of funding support to help artists of all sorts, but that included artists with a disability. The government said that there were unprecedented effects on the cultural and creative sector, and they offered a $250 million creative economy job maker package to help people in the creative sector get back to work. An Arts and Health Advisory Committee was established with parliamentarians elected to government on that committee, which established how the sector would be reactivated in a COVID-safe way because of the big hit that it had taken. And the roadmap of principles for reactivating the sector included additional funding on top of the $250 million, such as $125 million RISE funding, which was about reactivating the sector after COVID to restart programs, projects, companies, artists' work, etc. A million show starter fund, predominantly for the private sector, a $50 million Screen Australia Kickstarter fund for the film industry, and a $35 million Arts Sustainability Fund. And this is available on the government website, and so anyone can have a look at it. Let's have a case example of an artist with disability, Carly Findlay, who has catalogued the issues for her due to COVID-19. She says, like many artists, COVID-19 has impacted me in a huge way. I've had almost all events from March to July, that was 2020, postponed or cancelled because of the shutdowns that we had in Australia. My income has decreased significantly. I'm working from home for both my freelance work and in my part-time job as Access and Inclusion Coordinator at Melbourne Fringe, the Melbourne Fringe Festival. And I chose this artist because Melbourne had the longest lockdown that really took up most of 2020. And Carly said, I have been feeling a sense of shock and grief. Now, this is something I can respond to because I was in Melbourne in the lockdown, and I was locked down with my adult children and my partner for much of 2020. As I said, we had 2 months lockdown from March, late March to May. And then we had 3 weeks of freedom. And then after that 3 weeks, the cases exploded across the Melbourne area, and we were locked down from late May, beginning of June until November. And it affected people's mental health. It affected their physical health. They mostly ate chocolate, drank wine, and ate yummy meals that they ordered through Uber because there was nothing else to do. You could only go 5 kilometres from your home. There was a curfew at night, so you couldn't do anything. And it affected people significantly. Carly continues, in my second book, Growing Up Disabled in Australia, an anthology of Black Ink, they're the publishers, was due out in June 2020. I received an email from the publisher at Black Ink telling me they'd made the decision to delay Growing Up Disabled until February 2021. What will life be like in 2021 with new social distancing measures introduced day by day? Will people even have the money to buy books then, with increased unemployment? Now, Carly's in Melbourne. The COVID cases in Melbourne are rising again. We're going into winter, and this is the time when COVID is worse, of course. It's more dangerous. So we'll have to watch and see what happens in Melbourne and how that's going to affect things this year. It could end up being bad again. Let's hope not. And Carly goes on, as I write, we are in stage 3 lockdown, and holding and attending book launches is definitely out. While this decision stung for a day or two, I've had the luxury of having time to reflect, and my thinking shifted. So it's not all negative. This was the best decision for the contributors and for the book and for the book's readers. I have a duty of care to the contributors and the audience. I want to keep them safe, and I want the book to have a chance to shine in its own right. So what's happening here is that there are tensions going on that cause people to have mental health problems, stress, but also positive times where they can slow down, reflect, focus on one activity and get things done. Tensions between the art, in this case publishing, the professional work in arts management, where those who distribute the book promote it and get it into the marketplace and sell it, have to change things radically. Tensions between ability and disability. And we can all understand that, as we all have our own disability in one way or another. And tensions between independence and dependence. We're dependent on following all those rules for our own safety. We're independent if we're fortunate to live in our own home. And there are all sorts of other ways we can be independent through our job if we're fortunate to keep having one and having a salary. So if we look at education and what education can do, we are looking at a project where short online modules on career skills for artists are just the sort of thing that's needed at this time where people are locked down time and time again. Those courses need to be tailored to ability, possibly supported by a disability educator where needed to guide the artists through the modules, and available face-to-face when possible post-COVID, so that people can have a group experience if they require it. That education will be supported by an online manual developed specifically for each module. And it can be tailored by short videos where there are courses in filmmaking that are modular, and courses in curating that can initially be online, but then people can go into museums and can touch the objects and feel them if, for example, they're sight impaired.
Apologies, Ruth. I think time is up. You might want to wrap up quickly.
Yes. So artists with a disability need to have an equal chance to shine and show their abilities to everyone. So what we've covered is the importance of education in times of crisis, particularly for artists with a disability. And we've done that by looking at a case study of an artist in the state with the most lockdowns. I'll throw it open now to questions.
Thank you so much, Ruth. We will have those questions in a bit, but I really appreciate the presentation. It was really very thought-provoking, and it's also resonant with many parts of the world as well, particularly with Kali's words that really resonated very well. Thank you. Our second presenter today is Ji-Yang Shim. Dr. Shim is presently working as Assistant Professor, Department of Art Education at the Hongik University in Seoul. Dr. Shim's research interests include public pedagogy through radical modern art and controversial visual culture associated with manipulatively constructed concepts of freedom of expression in relation to sociology of knowledge and censorship. The presentation today will be on museums making a case for LGBTQ history. Over to you, Dr. Shim.
Thank you, Chihu, for introducing me. Okay, let me share my PowerPoint. Can you see my screen? Okay, let me start my presentation. So to foster creative response to social diversity and equity, I will examine a high-profile representative example of LGBTQ expression, especially in America. Because LGBTQ societies in South Korea are actually alienated and stigmatized due to the country's low tolerance of social differences, resulting in distress and suicidal impulses of that society members. And there have been a lot of tragedies, as you might know. And however, the art scene, especially major museums and mainstream museums in Korea, have not taken a step forward for these issues and LGBTQ history in Korea, because it's much more difficult to consider controversial issues than to tackle mainstream issues for administrative, financial, and political reasons. So today, what I'm going to see is this one, hide and seek exhibition, difference in desire in American portraiture. because it's one of the most recent examples in a long history of censorship of LGBTQ art in the United States. And it was the first major museum exhibition to focus on themes of non-normative sexuality in American portraiture. The exhibition was co-curated by Jonathan Katz and David Ward. Hide and Seek was hosted at two major museums. The first one is the National Portrait Gallery of Smithsonian Institution and the Brooklyn Museum of Art in Brooklyn. Both raised huge controversies, attracting conservatives and religious groups for its images of homosexuality and Christianity. However, as you can see on the slide, the two exhibitions have different endings. The first one at the MPG in Washington was a fail, and the other one in Brooklyn was a success. So what would be the differences? So let me briefly talk about the first one at the MPG. In Washington, the Hide and Seek exhibition ran at the MPG from 2010 to 11. Among a number of debates and controversies surrounding the more than 100 pieces of art in this exhibition, a 4-minute video titled "A Fire in My Belly" by David Wojnarowicz was removed, unfortunately, because of the images of homosexuality, AIDS, and ants crawling over a crucifix. So let me show you the video for a second. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, this is the scene of ants crawling over a crucifix. Okay, let me stop here. So at the center of the attack, the controversy and the video was Bill Donahue, president of the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, as well as several conservative members of Congress. Most importantly, the decision to remove the work from the gallery, the MPG, was made by Smithsonian Secretary at that time, Wayne Clough. Clough's decision to remove it was made before he had even seen the film or the exhibition. So when I had a personal communication with the Katz, the curator, he said that the curators expected political controversy around the first major national gay and lesbian exhibition. So they prepared for the attacks. But what really happened inside the gallery was not about the work or exhibition itself, but rather about the authority of the gallery. He also said the issue there was MPG was part of a larger museum structure, Smithsonian Institution, in which Wayne Clough stands at the top. So Clough just reacted without any knowledge and real sense of the history of that issue. Clough was offered several alternatives to removing the Wojnarowicz film. But instead of dealing with all the alternatives, Clough just pulled the video. Well, and then the removal led to the mobilization of supporters as well. Protests against the decision were raised in New York and Chicago. In front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, artists and activists for free speech rallied, holding picket signs and pictures of the work of David Wojnarowicz, the left one. Thousands of comments were posted on the internet, and other arts organizations and foundations reacted. But anyways, it was removed. Although the museum finally gave up the very important and meaningful artwork dealing with the valuable subjects due to pressure from outside, the show was not that. This exhibition, in fact, continued 1 year later at Brooklyn Museum of Art. The decision was made by the museum itself, not the curators. The biggest difference between the original exhibition and this one was that the Brooklyn Museum exhibition made a point of highlighting a fire in my belly. So as you can see in the picture, curators have set up an educational space in a side gallery and screened multiple versions of A Fire in My Belly. Also, they included 4 books with the interviews with the artists, as well as documents relating to historical and educational aspects of this work to help the public better understand why it was so important to show this work in this museum and in this exhibition. And there are some key success factors. The first one is the clarity of the museum's progressive position. The revival of hide and seek exhibition at the BMA Brooklyn Museum represented the museum's choice to rededicate itself to its understanding of what it should do for the arts, standing for freedom of expression. At that time, Koch said, Brooklyn Museum understands themselves in distinction to the mainstream as doing the most progressive, the dangerous, the kinds of things that the other museums will not touch. So the Brooklyn Museum was trying to understand its progressive position as a mainstream museum in America based on its resources and its mission. This understanding provided a solid foundation for planning the controversial exhibition. And the show was a success. And finally, the museum itself had received public recognition as a powerful venue for freedom of expression. And second is consultation and interfacing with the media and diverse public, including opponents. The curators and museum executives continued to host public dialogues about various forms of queer arts with the professionals, interest groups against or for gay and queer arts and artists and entertainers as well through panel discussion and symposia. So the Brooklyn Museum invited other museum directors to talk about queer art and museum's role in promoting it. And the curator said, although museum world was a progressive institutional world, it had been a series of closed doors because it was very uncomfortable with the questions of homosexuality. So the main topic of all the discussions was why and how. The program looked at the history and current state of the people against the queerness and asked the question, where do we go from here? And the Brooklyn Museum staff also gathered feedback from social media and email, continuing to ask the public about homosexual topics and each program relating to hide and seek exhibition using multiple on and offline sites. I think this one is most important one, at least for me, partnership. There were a lot of public programs relating to the exhibition, and many programs were designed in partnership with We Are the Youth, the project-based group. And this group is one of the biggest and most powerful LGBTQ youth communities and projects in the United States. So due to the partnership and consultation with We Are the Youth, other interest groups and organizations such as The Door, Torch, Oxbow School, and even music band Shadow Lovers that had been working with the group, We Are the Youth, actively joined in supporting the museum and the exhibition. And the fourth one is the diversity outreach program. There were several events making connections across the fields and topics such as film, literature, culture. For example, in the case of film screening event on the top, it featured the film Pink Narcissus, which was rarely viewed in the past because of its homosexual theme and images. And and the audiences were able to have a deep conversation with the director, James Bidgood. Another connection that museum was trying to make was communication with living witnesses of AIDS through the program In Conversation to commemorate AIDS Day. The guest was Larry Kramer. You can see him on the slide, a playwright and author. He shared his authentic story of tragedy, the advent of AIDS, saying that it was the history of the world for anyone who lived through it. So through a variety of public dialogues and programs across fields and subjects, the audience could and visitor could realize how important this topic was and how the disease impacted culture and community as well as the art world. Also, there were a lot of panel discussions such as gender and sexuality in Harlem Renaissance, and book talk titled Book Club, various artist talks and curator talks. The museums need to think about strategies in negotiating the public interests. There are always possibility of attacks from stubborn moral crusaders. You know what I mean, moral crusaders. If museums stray from making nice, they risk a confrontation. Like making nice means making everything safe. And they risk a confrontation with those who have a certain image to shield or an alternative image they would prefer to project. So museums must focus on their progressive positioning for diversity and equity with the new strategic preparation for securing funding, quenching public thirst for novelty as educational institutions with a mission-driven status. And I hope museums in Korea, especially major museums in Korea, also progressively take a step forward to handle LGBTQ issues in history and queer arts with different perspectives while resisting safe and facilitating public dialogues to make a case. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ji-young. Also, a lot of things to think about here. I really appreciate your advocacy for museums' progressive positioning, in all this, and I also truly appreciate that the idea of partnerships, and engaging with consultation and interfacing with various stakeholders is really vital and crucial, right, as we move forward, because it's really quite hard in each particular space, to engage in these issues. Thank you so much.
And it's a hot button, especially in South Korea.
Yeah. Thank you. So next, we have Yuri Kim and Sojong Park. Yuri Kim is a PhD student for integrated arts therapy at Ewha Women's University. Her work is based on 10 years of experience teaching arts to children. Her research interests include multiculturalism, social action, and trauma in art therapy. Dr. Sojong Park is an assistant professor in the Graduate School of Education art therapy major, also at the Ewha Women's University in Seoul. As a researcher, Dr. Park has explored multiculturalism, psychiatric and or addiction, and community-based practice and social action with art therapy from both qualitative and art-based research paradigms. Today, their presentation will be a phenomenological study of community-based art project for the coexistence between South Korean youth and young North Korean defectors. I understand that this is going to be a video presentation. Please.
안녕하세요. 저는 이화여자대학교 교육대학원 미술치료교육 전공의 조교수로 재직. Hello, I am Sojong Park, Assistant Professor in Art Therapy Education at the Graduate School of Education in Ewha Women's University, and with me I have Miss Yuri Kim, student in a doctoral program in Convergence Art Therapy at the College of Art and Design in Ewha Women's University, and she's going to speak also. Today we will share with you a phenomenological study of community-based art project called Making a Village. For the coexistence of South Korean youth and North Korean defectors, this project started with a question about the necessity of coexistence. Things that are happening internationally are heading towards the issue of how humans can coexist with respect to the environment and diversity that surrounds us. Now, why is coexistence important? Why do we have to work toward this taxing task of coexistence? This is because coexisting with others is essential for the existence of myself and humanity. The philosopher Martin Buber explained that our relationship is defined by the relationship between I and you, and I and it. Here, the relationship between I and you is defined as a relationship where humans meet and communicate with one another, where the relationship between I and it is divided into a one-sided relationship that treats the other as inanimate. Also, the relationship between I and you is based on the premise that you and I are inevitably different. You and I can exist because we are different and distinctive. It means that I can also exist as an independent entity because I have the other person different from me. From this point of view, it means that in order for the existence of I to exist, you, who is different from me, must exist. And for each other's existence, we need to make eye contact with the other person. When that is possible, you and I will be able to form a united community as us. Therefore, a world where only I exist that does not recognize you interference with our true existence, and coexistence becomes inevitable for all of us to live in a community. But then, coexisting with other people or other groups is far more difficult than we think. This is because if the difference between you and me is fundamentally like the culture in which we belong, it is not easy to narrow the gap of understanding. A case in point is South and North Koreans. The difference between the two Koreas exists in a number of areas such as culture, politics, economy, and etc. And thus coexistence between two Koreas is inevitably difficult. Moreover, given that the Korean War is still in a truce, the expected difficulties are even more pronounced. Nevertheless, the number of North Korean defectors coming to the South is over 1,000 every year, and despite the growing number of North Korean defectors, the process of them adapting to and coexisting with people in South Korea is causing social conflict. In particular, North Korean refugee youth have difficulty adjusting to school. If this problem of adjustment is not solved immediately, it may prolong into their college life and job careers afterwards. From the perspective of coexistence, we can't dismiss it as a personal problem of North Korean defectors, as the difficulties experienced by North Korean refugees ultimately affect South Koreans in the same community. It is necessary to solve such a problem from a community perspective for harmonious coexistence. We planned this study to look into the clues to solve this problem through the healing power of art. As a confession, we are art therapists, and the community-based art project we have done this time is also an extension of art therapy. Well, now in recent years, art therapy has gradually been expanding towards social participation in dealing with community problems in a healing way. In other words, it is a movement to treat community challenges with healing art. In fact, art has already played a role in representing the voice of the socially underprivileged in human history. But we, as art therapists, are now going beyond and above, as Martin Buber put it, because we believe that the healing use of art can ultimately provide an opportunity for two distinct groups in society to engage in dialogue. We have carried out this project. From now on, Ms. Yuri Kim will explain it in detail. The purpose of this study is to examine the phenomenon of how South Koreans and North Korean refugee youth who had different cultures and complex historical background found answers for coexistence through a symbolic and hands-on project of making a village using phenomenological research methods. Participants in this study were South Korean youth and North Korean defector youth attending Daeum School in Seoul, Korea. A total of 8 volunteers participated. Daeum School is the first integrated school in Korea where South Korean students and North Korean refugee students can learn together while acknowledging their differences. When the school approved our research, they requested us to disclose the school name in publishing our paper and conferences. The sessions of this project were carried out once a week for a total of 10 weeks, along with the semester as an after-school program, and we held an exhibition of the works created on the final week 11. Students were told in detail in advance that this project would be used as research material, and they all agreed to it, and for legal minors, we obtained consent from their parents and guardians. Making a village was organized in 4 phases by referring to Martin Buber's theory of I, you, we. The program content is the following. First of all, in session 1, 2, 3, we actually understood and explored ourselves by creating our characters and the place where our characters live on the subject of who is I. In sessions 4 to 8, a collaboration began with the theme of meeting I and you, and through this, participants had time to recognize you and confirm their existence and identify through others. In session 9 and 10, our village was completed with the theme of the village we live in. Prior to the start of the program, researchers asked participating students to take pictures of the sky on their way home each week of their art class. When the village was completed, a beam project was used as a video image to cover the village, and we finished by sharing the constructed village and video were displayed together. So we were able to show that at the end of the year as an event. In the program, we used various materials such as semi-finished recycled product, natural materials, and other decorative materials so that participants could freely select and work on them. For research data, the researchers' observation journals, verbal vocabulary of the class, artworks, interviews, and qualitative questionnaire data of participating students were collected and analyzed by Georgie's phenomenological experiential research method. The conclusion extracted from this is the following. First of all, 3 high-level topics and 8 sub-themes were derived. Topic 1, a new look at the familiar myself. Topic 2, understanding others by defining myself. Topic 3, a sense of making us through coordination and compromise. The sub-topics followed by these topics, and they are probed in detail through artworks. Subtopic 1-1, which emerged from a new look at the familiar myself of topic 1, shows that when the participants first searched for I, somewhat superficial aspect of their personality, appearance, characteristics, etc. came to mind of the participant. In the expressions of figure 1 and NKD4, we can see that he expresses and shares the image of the fact that she likes eating and perceives himself as lazy. In addition, subtopic 1-2 allows participants to realize what is important and necessary to them by creating characters and person spaces that symbolize themselves. It provides them with a time to look back on themselves. We provided this self-reflection moment for them. In figure 4, NKD4, he was able to think about the future while participating in the program. He said he ended up building a big house as he wanted to put in all his favorite things and hobbies. And if you look at figure 5, BSK1 thought about a space where his character could feel comfortable and completed building his personal space. Subtopic 1-3 shows that the participants recognize their values in artworks. And here you can see that there is a difference in the point where South Koreans and North Korean defectors put their weight on values. Most of the North Korean refugee youth focused on spending time together with others, whereas South Korean youth prioritized individuality and wanted a space where they could be comfortable alone, as seen in BSK2. Through this work, BSK2 said it was good to be able to learn more about himself in the process and to express the relaxing space required for individuals. On the other hand, in the case of NKD4, he shared that he wanted to chat with friends in a large space and showed 9 hobbies he'd like to engage in the space. Next is the subtopic 2-1, derived from understanding others by defining myself, which is topic 2. Participants can recognize the existence of others through their own symbolic individualities by creating their own characteristics and understanding differences. NKD6, if you look at it, he said it was good to be able to see that everyone is different, and it was shown by the creation of a character with their own individuality and that each person's perspective is different. In subtopic 2-2, we can see that the desire for wealth, economic value, and village safety are important among North Korean defectors. While South Korean youth did not express their personal opinions or desires for this, they accepted the values North Korean refugee youth expressed. Subtopics 2-3 showed that the participating students experienced invisible difficulties due to their differences. This was not apparent from the outside in the process of working, but after the village was completed, through journaling by the participant, especially from North Korean refugee youth, it was confirmed that there were difficulties of lack of communication here and there. It is subtopic 3-1 of making us through coordination and compromise, which is topic 3. When sketching the ideas for making a village in session 4, the participants shared their opinions and communicated with each other to find answers for coexistence. 3-2 showed that the participating students were able to discover what is better with us, not me as individuals, through the completed village, and share the values of the community. NKD1 initially thought that the work created based on each person's individuality would not fit at all, but when he saw the result, it was done successfully and well-matched. Through this, he came to realize that coexistence was also defined as helping each other. In addition, NKD5 said that through making a village, even if it is not perfect, when they were gathered together, they felt wonderful and beautiful. Coexistence for her was explained as having different backgrounds integrated in one space. The participants showed that the meaning of coexistence was about being together, and through the project, they were able to discover values created together and alone that cannot be created alone. The study showed that the key to coexistence is the multifaceted perception of our own individualities and values, the courage to reveal oneself, the responsibility for respecting others, coordination based on dialogue, and the beautiful value of the community. Before the end of the presentation, I would like to show you a video of the project. Let's watch it. As Martin Buber emphasized, in the end, coexistence with others is an inevitable task that humans must achieve in order to exist. And it is natural that one faces challenges large and small in the process of being together with others who are different from us. But what's important is, in that process, how will we constantly reveal ourselves and take responsibility for others? In other words, in what way will I exist in the community? The answer to this will need to be continuously explored in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for the very meaningful project. Definitely, the power of art, creating that safe space for us to explore this notion of coexistence. Truly appreciated all the different views that the students have had in this. Thank you. The final presentation today will be from Sean Cochran and Benjamin Bolden. Sean is a PhD student at Queen's University who is interested in improvisation, music education, and creating opportunity for all students to engage in meaningful art practices. As an artist, Sean explores the nature of connection among performers to audience and to settings. Dr. Benjamin Bolden is a music educator and composer, is an associate professor in UNESCO Chair of Arts and Learning in the Faculty of Education at Queen's University, Canada. His research interests include arts education, music education, the learning and teaching of composing, creativity, arts-based research, teacher education, teacher knowledge, and teachers' professional learning. The presentation today will be Silent Stages, Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic in Canadian El Sistema Programs. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Yu. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm very happy and fortunate to be here. I'm just grabbing my presentation to get started here. And I'm just so inspired by all of the work that everybody's doing, that it's very beautiful things that are coming out of this symposium. So thank you very much for sharing. So I will report on a research study that Ben and I have been working on for the last little bit, I guess during the COVID-19 pandemic. And yeah, it's basically the responses of the COVID-19 pandemic in Canadian El Sistema programs. So over the past decade, El Sistema and El Sistema Inspired programs have become increasingly popular community music education and social welfare initiatives that aim to benefit socially and economically disadvantaged youth. Proponents of the programs frequently cite research that shows increases in social and emotional growth, community building, and sense of belonging in academic and cognitive growth. Early reports about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic have revealed that socially and economically disadvantaged youth seem to face greater challenges accessing remote instruction. El Sistema programs have seen similar declines in engagement with these vulnerable populations, and the remote delivery of music education has met with significant challenges, as we all know, trying to teach in this trying time. So El Sistema programs, they're varied. It's a global sort of music education approach, and there's no real definite way that they are approached. However, there are 5 defining features of the programs as they were originally created through the Venezuelan model. So one is social change. The primary objective of El Sistema programs is social transformation through the pursuit of musical excellence. One happens through the other, and neither is prioritized at the expense of the other. The other is ensembles. The focus of El Sistema programs is the orchestra, and I must say it's the Western orchestral model, and choral experiences. There's no one-on-one instructions. It's always done as a group. Frequency is also important. El Sistema ensembles meet multiple times every week over extended periods. Accessibility, of course, is hugely important. El Sistema programs are free, are not selective in admission. And finally, connectivity is important. Every program is connected to their community and linked at an urban, regional, and national level. So there is a cohesive network of services and opportunities for students across the country. This is found more in the Venezuelan model than other countries, I'd have to say. So for myself, I'm a teacher, an active teacher in El Sistema program in Kingston, Ontario. These are some of our students pre-COVID times when the stages were not silent. And it has been a wonderful time. So I've been teaching this method for about 6 years, and I do have some bias that these programs are valuable to our students. Our program is Sistema inspired, but we definitely strive to include student-centered approaches to learning based on creative music making. So for this research project, I explored how Canadian LSSTEM and LSSTEM-inspired programs responded and adapted programming during the pandemic, and to what extent instructors and administrators felt they were effective in meeting the needs of socially and economically disadvantaged youth. Our research question was, how has the experience of the pandemic influenced LSSTEM programming? And this question was addressed through a qualitative multiple case study of 12 LSSTEM and LSSTEM-inspired programs. I put 8 up there, but I actually have 12. Sorry about that. Data were gathered through interviews with one teacher and one administrator for each program for a total of 24 interviews. So this happened between August 2020 and into January 2021. Did some interviews over Microsoft Teams. And the participants were generally employed with organizations for less than 5 years and were from their early 20s to 50s in age. Now, they were all, of course, very seasoned music educators and musicians, often playing with orchestras and teaching in schools for many years as well. So the findings that came across for these programs were four themes, and they were a social curriculum, pedagogical change, musical choices, and anti-racism. These 4 themes were often overlapped. So I'll just break down a little bit of the findings as they came through with a few quotes from some of the participants. So the social curriculum. The pandemic has emphasized the need for systemic programs to respond to the social needs of their students according to the data. As lockdowns began to take effect and programs moved online, participants indicated that their programming pivoted to include more robust social curriculum. This curriculum included things such as well-being check-ins and delivering healthy snacks to families. In addition to focusing on social supports, Systema programs sought to provide technology supports for their students in the form of devices and financial help for internet access. One participant from Ontario said that the most important aspect that we focused on is the incorporation of the social curriculum. They actually provided paid training for their staff to provide social support and mentoring for our students as they navigated the stress of the pandemic. They actually moved a significant amount of their programming away from music instruction and really just focused on creating the relationships with their students. Pedagogical change. Participants in this study indicated that musical pedagogy was the focus of their programs that they had to work on. Systema programs have been criticized in the past about the use of hierarchical methods based on the Western orchestral model. The onset of the pandemic response seems to have shown the limitation of that orchestral model for participants. Issues of logistics, such as coordinating large ensembles, became prevalent. Participants said that they shifted away from large group programming and focused on smaller ensembles and one-on-one lessons. Student-centered approaches also became more used. One participant said that they incorporated a lot more sharing and creating of their own music, even just simple made-up melodies. They did a game where they would roll some dice using a YouTube channel and give a challenge based on that dice. One challenge might be to make a dancing tune, and the student needed to make up some sort of dancing type sounds, whatever that meant to them. Participants across the country were also incorporating more listening and sharing exercises, where students would bring in their favorite music to listen to and share with the ensemble and the group over their Zoom. Musical choices. The use of the Western orchestral model, as I said earlier, has been often criticized. However, participants seem to be actively incorporating other music based on community interest and backgrounds. For example, a program in Alberta has been actively consulting with the Indigenous community that many of their students are a part of. Through these consultations, they have incorporated Indigenous drumming into the programming and hope to continue as in-person programming returns by including Indigenous dance teachings. In Montreal, participants indicated that they are incorporating more programming based on the cultural makeup of their students and invited community members to be a part of an artistic advisory committee to inform musical choices. And as we see in this quote from the participant in Montreal, at their program, we've included community members to help choose musical styles to include alongside our orchestral programming. Specifically, they were focusing on the large Haitian population that's in Montreal. And the fourth theme that I explored with this study was a focus on anti-racism. So what struck a lot of programs were not just that we were moving through this COVID-19, but also that there was a significant amount of racial reckoning around the death of George Floyd and the protests that emerged, spurred by the Black Lives Matter movement. And this participant in Manitoba really struck them, saying that the protests in the summer really put things in perspective for them. Are we doing this using the Western orchestral music as some sort of savior way? Like, do we really think that if we stick kids in an orchestra, are we going to fundamentally improve their lives? We need to go way beyond that and consider the systemic issues our students and families face. And in addition to all of this, Systema organizations sort of banded together across Canada, and they have created an overarching Systema Canada umbrella organization to share resources. And now they indicated that they have been hosting frequent online meetings to sort of discuss issues related to programming and various cultural and systemic needs of the participants. So the four themes that I outlined in the findings seem to paint a picture of a changing programmatic priority spurred by the pandemic response. Participants were deeply aware of criticisms leveled at the El Sistema philosophy, and many seem to take to heart the need for programmatic change. This primarily manifested as a reevaluation of using Western orchestral teaching methods and the increased importance of a social curriculum. Anti-racism in programming and hiring was found to be important to the participants and a driving force of change within health system organizations. And in the future, we hope to talk to these programs more and and we want to know more about student, family, and community perspectives and how these pandemic experiences have compared with other countries' health system programming. And I'm particularly interested to know in what way these programming initiatives will be impacted when we return to in-person teaching and getting our groups together again. And that's really it for me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Sean. Certainly a lot for us to think about as well. I mean, in terms of repertoire choice, for one, and inclusion of more social curriculum. I've been told that we only have 10 minutes for this discussion because of the delay that was happening earlier. So I'm going to just jump right into it, if that's okay with everybody. So perhaps since we only have those few minutes, I'm going to start straight away with Ruth. The suggestion of that online modules on career skills for artists supported by disability educator to guide is really well worth considering in light of the various tensions that you mentioned. Just wondering, what are the next steps in this process?
Well, the next step is to seek some funding for this. It's something that I've been talking to the Disability Arts Organisation No Strings Attached about to see if we can find some funding to support it. It's not cheap to develop educational materials, particularly tailored ones where we need to have a disability educator at our elbow and also a disability support person to take the people with a disability, the artists with a disability, through those modules. So that's our next step.
Thank you. But yes, certainly, I think you have to go for it. I think it's really, really going to be something that will be very impactful in the long run. So over to Dr. Shim. My question is, what are current issues in curating and exhibiting LGBTQ themes in Korean museums? And has the key factors that you mentioned, this clarifying museums positioning, consulting, partnership, and having outreach programs provided some sort of guidance to this?
to be honest, although some small organizations and interest groups of queer artists in Korea are trying to explore some kind of LGBTQ art and communities, visual art scene, especially major museums, have never ran or planned non-normative sexuality-themed exhibitions and have not taken a step forward. Although queer art and artists have great influences on society, either visibly or invisibly. So that's the most, I think, worst part of the queer art in Korean society. This year, Gukje Gallery, have you ever heard Gukje Gallery? Gukje Gallery had opened Korea's first gay artist, Robert Mapplethorpe's retrospective in Seoul and Busan. However, the exhibition is another version of a traveling exhibition, The Perfect Moment, in 1988, that already provoked huge controversy regarding artistic freedom, censorship, and museums' role as a public space. And Mapplethorpe's work had lost the impact to shock people in the art world because people had gotten used to his style and he became more well-known and he's kind of a legend. And there had been no public program for the exhibition as well.
Thank you for sharing. Yes, it's really tough, right? I mean, I think it's not easy to get these possibilities across.
Right.
But I certainly think that, you know, your suggestions of pushing for more sort of an interactive possibility and even partnerships, as you say, particularly with youth, I think,
yes,
seems to be really a good way to move forth. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go for it.
So maybe over to Yuri and Sojung. Can I ask you what were some key differences, you know, identified through this village project by the South and North Korean youth, and how were the challenging dialogues and negotiations facilitated towards this idea of coexistence? Maybe Yuri like to respond first.
우선은 뭐 연구 결과에서도 나와 있듯이
As you can see in the outcomes of the research, North Korean refugee youth, they are more thinking and focused on groups, and South Korean youth, they're focused on individuality more. So, I mean, North Korean refugee youth, they wanted to share a lot of opinions with others. However, a South Korean counterpart, they tried to stay pretty calm and quiet. So that was very distinctive from both South and North Korean youth. And North Korean youth, when it comes to creating their ideas and conceiving their ideas, they wanted to make a very big kind of a village or a house, whereas a South Korean counterpart, they wanted to create a very small and individualistic kind of a house. And when it comes to the images that come to their mind, there was a lot of difference as well. North Korean kids, they thought about a lot of villages in North Korea, and obviously South Korean counterpart, they thought about those village characteristics available in South Korea. So that is why they had a lot of different images and associations which are different from one another in their minds. And so when we see North Korean youth, I believe that they come from different backgrounds compared to South Korean counterparts. So what I tried to do was to not to skew toward one side, but to try to be very neutral and not taking any sides. So actually, it was a challenging task for me as well to try to strike a balance each time. Thank you.
Thank you. Does Sojung have anything to add to this? You're muted.
Actually, Yuri said it really well, so I don't think I have anything else to add on top of that. She answered it so perfectly, so yes.
Thank you. I think it is contemplating on the notion of we, right? I mean, how how does that create solutions and the idea of coexistence as we continue to acknowledge the differences, more than the similarities as well. I think it's a way forward for us to really think deeply about. So over to Sean. Could you elaborate a little more about this idea of reevaluation of using Western orchestral teaching methods and what changes are currently happening in terms of pedagogy and repertoire, which might perhaps also be in line with these anti-racism initiatives?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I think that given the social change philosophy of El Sistema, I think a lot of teachers and administrators and students are realizing that the idea of participatory music making, to use Torino's term for music, participatory music making is much more valuable for social change than representational music, which we see with orchestral music using a composition written by somebody who is perhaps deceased and sort of putting it together to perform as a presentation. So the idea of including things that are just simply more community-based, making it more we-based, to bring it back to the other project, has become increasingly powerful, especially during this pandemic time. The other thing was that making things really small, going away from these large ensembles, even just for logistic reasons, has had this effect of bringing students a lot closer together and creating a bigger community, or a more tight-knit community. So it's been really great in that sense. But I think especially though, the idea of making things more participatory has been apparent across the board for the people that I spoke to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this idea of participatory, which then also talks about the notion of the social, right? I think it's very much part of the whole El Sistema foundation, essentially, actually. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we have exactly 3 minutes. So what I'm going to do is probably just ask everyone to have a final statement about this notion of diversity and cultural representation, and maybe just so that our audience can go away with some thinking about what this might be. I can invite Ruth to just begin.
Diversity is needed in all sectors of the arts, from the boardroom at the top to the movie studio, to middle management and in the audiences, depending on the type of arts event or arts performance that's put on. We need to get away from the fact that the arts is about the high arts and have it much more representative of the community. I live in a multicultural society where 50% of people are either born overseas or have one or more parents born overseas. And our arts should look like the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Jiang?
I would like to say diversity would be the maybe the quality of being diverse, or the state of being diverse and factor of being diverse for any kind of context in this world. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Yuri. You're muted.
Yes. Yes, a difference and diversity. I believe that we have to reflect on this every time so that we can think about what is the best way to approach it better. And I am in this doctoral program, and so I would like to explore more broad approaches to diversity going forward. Thank you.
Sojung?
Yes, I think when I think about the word diversity, I think if we fail to recognize the diversity in the society, we're going to lose the meaning of life itself, because without recognizing the diversity, I think that's going to exclude ourselves from living in this world as well. So I think diversity is a key to actually connect all of us together, living in the community together. So I think finding a way through art, how we can recognize and include each other, is going to be the homework that we're facing, that we have to deal with day by day. Thank you.
Thank you. I really love that, finding a way through arts. Sean, please.
For me, diversity cannot come from a center and welcome model where we are welcoming others into our space. It needs to come from somewhere that is generous and humble, where we are giving outwards rather than welcoming in. And I think that's so important to include with diversity.
And on that note, thank you for your generosity of thoughts and your wonderful presentations today. It's exactly 40 minutes into, and so I have to end here. Thank you all, and have a good afternoon, evening. Thank you so much.